an interesting question here about transportation. It says, regarding transportation, this is from Nicholas Pogioli. I hope I pronounced that right. Regarding transportation, much of the focus seems to be on developing new technologies to allow our current movement habits to continue unchanged, e.g. electric cars and biojet fuel. What is the actual habit that is unsustainable, not just the means? Let me throw this question over to you guys out in California, where cars are a way of living.
Yeah, I think that the way that a lot of our city's infrastructures are set up do prioritize cars, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, I also see a lot of exciting development going on in systems like the high-speed rail, which was recently announced for California. And we're looking forward to the systems such as this in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Obama's proposing a huge multi-billion-dollar rail system across the United States, which is a great idea in theory, but then the problem is materials costs, energy costs in building that. It's almost not worth it over the long term. So it's a difficult question to answer. I think that we're going to start traveling less in general as resources become more constrained, and telecommuting, video chat, things like that are going to become a lot more important.
Yeah, I think that it sort of ironically ties into what we're doing here. This is the idea of, we're trying to give a presentation to people who are all over the world, but we're asking everyone to just sit in the comfort of their own home as opposed to traveling someplace to do it. We have people all over the world submitting questions. Now, I happen to know that the Inhabitat readership is like 65% in the US and then about 35% international, but it seems like the questions that were submitted, at least like half of them were submitted by people living overseas. And we know that we have a bunch of people who are logged in from places as far away as Australia and Mauritius. So we're really thrilled that you guys are joining us, and it's kind of awesome that people are able to join us from places that far away just by using a computer. So I think that is maybe one answer to that question, and another is just that we actually really need to rethink our cities and look at urban design and think about ways to design landscapes so that they're more dense and they're more sustainable and they're more walkable, and you don't need cars to get around. It's one reason why I love New York City and why I moved here. Okay, I'm gonna move along. This is a question that actually came up in a bunch of the live questions right now, but it was also something that was submitted to us earlier. We thought this was a really good question because it comes up all the time. And we're gonna have Yuka answer this question. And the question is, how do you solve reducing consumerism? I think it's easy to sell people green products, but how about the idea of not buying what we don't need?
Yeah, I definitely think that overconsumption is a huge issue, and the short answer to this would be just stop buying stuff. But since we can't, and the way that our economy is set up, we do need to keep consuming things. I think an important thing to discuss is how we can reduce what we actually buy. I can't say that I, don't buy any more things. It's kind of a running joke here at Inhabitat that I'm the Imelda Marcos of sustainable shoes, and I do, of course, I continue to buy things, but I came up with 3 important points that I think we can kind of talk about to discuss how we can change our habits in the future. The first thing that I think we can do is change the way we think about what we buy, and I think quality over quantity, sort of going back to what Jill said about LED lighting. Even if things are more expensive to begin with, in the long run, you're actually getting more bang for your buck. So that's definitely something to think about. The second thing I would say is to just, when you're out in a store, actually think about whether or not you need something. I think a lot of our buying is done on an emotional basis. It could either be because you're bored or you feel like you need to keep up with the Joneses, but you don't need to buy something new every time you see a commercial for it or a new iteration or a new version of something comes out. A lot of times what we have is good enough, and I think it may not be the American way to think that way, but hopefully, with what's been going on with the recession and the economy has actually helped us kind of bring us back to ground level. And the last thing that I would recommend is changing business models. So that's something that businesses themselves can do to give more options to consumers in terms of what they buy. So one example I thought of for this was consumer electronics. Whenever I buy a new phone or a new camera, I realize that a lot of times I'm forced to consume things that I don't want to. For example, every time you buy a new phone, there's a charger that comes with it. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but a lot of times I've purchased a phone where I already had a charger for it. So in that case, if there was a way that phone makers could allow us to pay less for a phone that does not come with a charger, that would be one way to change business models so that consumers have a choice. And another thing is even instruction manuals. I think I have 20 instruction manuals that I've never even looked at. And if cell phone makers or electronics makers could even allow us to not buy the instruction manual and charge even $1 less, that would be a way to motivate people to buy the version without that product in it. Does anybody else have anything to add about business models, examples of business models?
I want to add something really quickly, and I want Ariel to weigh in as well. I actually think this question of consumption is very heavily tied to the question of the price of items. And, we always get the two questions about consumption and then about how much things cost. And I really think it's actually, they kind of go hand in hand. A lot of times green products cost more. And I think sometimes it's a good thing that they cost more because they encourage people to buy less of them. It's like, you purchase one, for example, let's talk about, shoes or maybe, shopping for a new coat or something. There was a time sort of back in the past where people would invest in one really well-made, really fabulous item that was probably expensive, that they expected that it would last them like 10, 15 years or so, and they wouldn't constantly keep buying new things every season. And I think that we need to kind of start thinking more like that again. You purchase one item that fits you perfectly, that is really well made, it's durable, it's gonna last you, versus just constantly buying more and more and more. And I think unfortunately our economy is recently has kind of become set up in such a way, especially with consumer electronics and also with clothes, that there's this planned obsolescence and also these sort of seasonal trends which encourage people to want to buy things constantly. And I think that globalization and unnaturally cheap prices for things actually really exacerbates that problem. It's actually easy for people to go and buy a new coat every 4 months if they have an H&M near them, because coats at H&M are like $30, and so why not just keep buying more and more and more? So I think that actually it's not a bad thing to have things be a bit more expensive when it encourages people to look for quality over quantity. And I actually wanted Ariel maybe to speak a little bit about her experience in Italy.
Yeah, actually, when I was there, one of the first things I noticed is that people had very small wardrobes, but very well-made clothes. And actually, while I was there, an H&M opened in the city, and it was just the most novel thing anyone had ever seen, and it was horrible because it was like while I was there, our way of life was being introduced to them, when in reality, what they had been doing before was much more sustainable.